The art of doing nothing. 1. The grand hall of the Thorne estate was a cavernous expanse of glass and cold steel that seemed designed specifically to make a person feel like a very expensive ant. Outside, the city was a blurred smear of neon and rain, but inside, the air was climate-controlled to a degree that felt almost aggressive. Beatrix stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her silk gown the color of a winter sky, shimmering whenever she made the slightest movement. To anyone passing by, she was the ultimate portrait of high society poise, a woman whose only concern was the clarity of her diamonds or the vintage of the champagne in her glass. In reality, Beatrix was calculating the exact amount of leg muscle required to keep her from face-planting into the hors d'oeuvres. In her previous life, she had been a woman of frantic, relentless motion, a high-stakes crisis negotiator who lived on caffeine and adrenaline until her heart gave out at 34. Reborn into this world of soft carpets and heavy curtains, she had made a silent, sacred vow: she would never be useful again. If this world wanted a pretty vase, she would be the finest porcelain they had ever seen, entirely hollow, perfectly still, and impossible to move. Beatrix, look at me. The voice belonged to Dominic Thorne. He was the heir to the Thorne fortune, a man who believed his every word was a royal decree. Beatrix turned her head with a slow, agonizingly deliberate pace, as if the movement itself were a grand favor. I am looking, Dominic, she said, her voice soft and light, like a breeze through silk. You have a bit of spinach between your front teeth. It's quite distracting. Dominic's hand flew to his mouth, his face turning a shade of red that clashed horribly with his maroon tie. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his dignity. Forget the spinach. We are finished, Beatrix. I cannot proceed with our union. My heart has found a home in Piper. I know this ruins you, and I know you've built your life around the Thorne name, but I cannot live a lie. Nearby, Piper stood waiting, her fingers twisted in the fabric of her modest dress. She was earnest and plain-spoken, looking entirely overwhelmed by the predatory elegance of the gala. Beatrix looked at her and felt a wave of genuine, profound relief wash over her. If the wedding was off, she wouldn't have to manage the Thorne social calendar. She wouldn't have to oversee their foundations or smile at people she despised for the next 40 years. Oh, Beatrix said, her eyes widening into two vacant, shimmering pools of feigned shock. Does this mean the engagement is over? Truly and completely. I won't have to move into the city manor. Dominic braced himself. He expected a storm of tears, or perhaps a sharp, calculated argument about the merger of their families. It does. I've already spoken to the lawyers. I will handle the fallout. Beatrix took a slow, thoughtful sip of her drink. Her heart was doing a little victory dance. If that is what you wish, I accept, she said with a soft sigh that sounded like heartbreak but was actually the sound of a heavy weight being lifted from her shoulders. I suppose I shall have to find a way to occupy my time. It will be a very quiet life, I imagine. Perhaps I'll take up competitive napping. Dominic blinked, his ego visibly bruised by her lack of devastation. He had expected to be the hero of a tragic romance. Instead, he felt like a man who had just announced a weather report to an empty room. You aren't going to fight. You won't ask me to reconsider. I am much too tired for an argument, Dominic. And you look so certain. It would be rude to argue with such a firm expression. She leaned in slightly, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. May I have the house by the coast? The stone one with the library and the heavy curtains. Yes. If it settles the matter without a scene, the coastal estate is yours. Beatrix gave him a small, satisfied smile. She turned away, her heart light, and nearly collided with a wall of dark wool and expensive spice. She looked up, and for the first time that evening, her brain flickered to life. Vaughan Thorne stood there, his hands clasped behind his back. He was Dominic's uncle, the true power behind the family name. He was a man of shadows and silence, with eyes like polished flint, dark, deep, and unnervingly observant. You have been eavesdropping, she murmured, her silly mask slipping just a fraction. That is quite a lot of effort for a man of your standing, Mr. Thorne. Vaughan did not smile, but a spark of something sharp moved in his gaze. He looked at her empty glass and then at her face. And you have just traded a position of immense power for a garden and a nap. That is either a great mistake, or the most clever move I have seen in this room tonight. Beatrix hummed a low, sweet note. The garden has very old trees, Mr. Thorne. Sometimes, that is enough. She drifted past him, leaving the scent of jasmine and the echo of a secret in her wake. 2. Within 48 hours, Beatrix was gone from the city. The coastal estate was exactly as she desired, isolated, salt-aired, and perfectly still. The house was a sprawling stone manor that hugged the cliffs, more of a fortress than a vacation home. She spent her first few days in a state of absolute rest, reclining on a velvet chaise longue in the library with a book resting face down on her stomach. She had dismissed most of the staff, keeping only a cook who didn't like to talk and a housekeeper who moved like a ghost. The peace lasted until the third morning, when the library door swung open without a knock. Vaughan Thorne stood in the threshold, dressed in a dark sweater that made him look less like a businessman and more like a permanent fixture of the rugged landscape. The gate was locked, Vaughan said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It was, Beatrix agreed, not moving an inch. I find locks are very effective at keeping the world out. How did you get in, Mr. Thorne? Did you scale the cliffs? Or perhaps you flew? I have a key, he said, holding up a silver ring. I own the land this house sits on through the trust. My nephew neglected to mention that part of the bargain when he gifted it to you. Beatrix let out a long, theatrical sigh. She sat up slowly, the silk of her robe slipping from her shoulders. What do you want, Vaughan? If you've come to take the house back, I should warn you, I've already grown fond of the bathtub. It has 4 different massage settings. Vaughan stepped further into the room and picked up the book from her lap. It was a dense, leather-bound volume on maritime law and property rights. He raised an eyebrow. I thought you only read fashion journals and social columns. The ink is very clear in that one, Beatrix said, her expression turning sweet and vacant. The letters are so orderly. It's very soothing to look at. The book has no pictures, Beatrix. And the text is in Latin for the first 3 chapters. He leaned down, bracing his hands on the arms of her chair. You're a terrible liar. You play the part of a shallow, obsessed girl for years, yet the moment you're free, you run here to read law and stare at the sea. Why? Beatrix looked into his flinty eyes. The mask felt heavy today. Because being capable is exhausting, she said, her voice dropping its airy facade. In my experience, being smart invites everyone to bring you their problems and ask you to fix them. I am retired, Vaughan. I have done my time in the trenches of being the person everyone relies on. I just want to be a quiet observer now. Like a very pretty potted plant. Vaughan stared at her for a long beat. The problem with being an observer, he murmured, his breath warm against her cheek, is that eventually the world will force you to act. Or someone will try to see what you're hiding under all that silk. And which are you? She asked, her heart thumping a bit faster than she liked. The gardener or the person who wants to pull up the roots? I am your neighbor, he said, straightening up. The estate shared by this private beach is mine. I'll be staying there for the season. I don't believe in morning jogs, and I rarely have visitors. But I do expect my neighbors to be honest with me. Beatrix flopped back onto the cushions. My peaceful retirement has a neighbor. And it's the most intense man in the country. Fine. But if you come over asking for a cup of sugar, I'm telling the press you're a secret poet who writes about seagulls. I'll bring my own sugar, Vaughan said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. 3. The peace was demolished again the following morning by the sound of a horn, not the dignified low hum of Vaughan's car, but a frantic, insistent blaring. Dominic had arrived in his flashy red convertible, with Piper trailing behind him like a confused shadow. Beatrix, we need your help, Dominic called out as she opened the door, her hair still messy and her eyes half closed. The family is in an uproar. The board members are furious about the broken engagement. They say it shows a lack of character, and they're threatening to freeze my funds. Piper is being treated coldly by the cousins. We thought you could come back to the city for a few days, just smooth it over. Tell them you're happy for us. Beatrix leaned against the doorframe, looking at Dominic as if he were a particularly dull species of insect. Dominic, is the city falling apart? You look very unsettled. Perhaps a nap would help. Or a very long walk in the opposite direction. This isn't a joke, Beatrix. They always listen to you. You always knew exactly what to say to make the old men on the board feel like they were still in charge. Beatrix was about to give a very sharp refusal when a shadow fell across the porch. Vaughan stood there, looking as though he had simply grown out of the coastal stone. He stepped up beside Beatrix, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his coat. She isn't going anywhere, Vaughan said coolly. Uncle Vaughan, Dominic stammered. What are you doing here? Why are you in your sweater? I live here, Vaughan said. And you are disturbing the peace of a woman who clearly has no interest in your problems. Go back to the city, Dominic. Solve your own messes. Or better yet, hire someone to solve them for you. Beatrix saw a way to end Dominic's visits forever. She reached out and tucked her arm through Vaughan's, leaning her head against his shoulder with a sigh of feigned affection. Oh, Dominic, she said, her voice reaching that pitch of airy confusion she used as armor. I thought you understood. I didn't just want the house for the library. I wanted to be closer to the person who truly understands the family legacy. The real Thorne. Dominic's jaw dropped. You and Uncle Vaughan. But he's the CEO. He doesn't have time for nonsense. He makes time for the things he values, Beatrix finished, giving Vaughan a look of adoring vacuity. Now, please leave. We were about to have a very long, very quiet breakfast involving things you wouldn't understand. Like silence. Vaughan didn't miss a beat. He reached up and brushed a stray hair from her face with a touch that felt startlingly real. Go inside, Beatrix, he said softly. I'll handle this. Our tea is getting cold. Once the red car had sped away, Beatrix immediately stepped back, dropping his arm. Thank you. I suppose I owe you a favor. Or a very large cup of sugar. Vaughan watched her, his expression unreadable. Dominic will tell the family. By tomorrow, the world will think we are a pair. That is a very high price to pay for a quiet morning. Beatrix paused, looking out at the gray Atlantic. As long as you don't expect me to attend any board meetings or coordinate the winter gala, I can live with a few rumors. Rumors are just noise. I've learned how to tune them out. It's like living near a train station. Vaughan stepped closer, his gaze dropping to her lips. And if I want more than a rumor, Beatrix. If I want the woman who reads maritime law to actually speak to me. Then you'll have to bring a very good bottle of wine, she said, her stomach fluttering. And promise not to talk about the stock market. A few days later, Vaughan arrived at her door with exactly that, a vintage red and a suggestion. The news has reached the city, he said. The rumors are becoming frantic. We must be seen together once, or the questions will never stop. I have a boat. No crowds, no cameras, just a trip around the bay. They drifted out into the water on a wooden sloop, the sails snapping in the wind. The city was a distant, hazy memory. Beatrix lounged in the stern, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. Thinking again? Vaughan asked, leaning against the tiller. I was thinking that you are very good at being still, Beatrix said. Most men of your standing feel the need to fill the air with their own importance. You just let the world be. Vaughan's expression softened. I spend my life in rooms where every word is a negotiation or a bribe. Being with someone who doesn't want anything from me. It is the only time I feel I can simply exist as a man, not a title. He reached out, his fingers grazing her hand where it rested on the mahogany rail. Dominic thought you were a prize to be displayed. He didn't realize you were the only person in his life who actually knew how to breathe. Beatrix turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. The silly mask was nowhere to be found. And what do you think I am, Vaughan? I think you are someone who has been tired for a very long time, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rasp. And I think you've decided that the only way to stay safe is to pretend you don't care. But you don't have to hide that from me. 5. The piece was interrupted again a week later when Piper arrived at the manor, looking distraught and windswept. She had driven 3 hours in tears. Dominic is in trouble, she said, stumbling into the kitchen. He tried to manage a large acquisition on his own to prove he didn't need the board. He made a terrible error in the contracts. The rival family, the Vances, are going to take the coastal holdings. If he fails, the board will remove him. He's blaming me, saying I don't give him the right support. Whatever that means. Beatrix sat her down and pushed a cup of tea toward her. Slowly, Piper, breathe. What exactly did he sign? Did he use a crayon? Through hiccups, Piper explained the details. Beatrix felt a familiar, sharp irritation flicker in her chest. It wasn't because she cared for Dominic, but because she despised a poorly made deal. It was sloppy work. It offended her sense of order. Wait here, Beatrix said. She walked across the grass to Vaughan's estate and went straight into his study without knocking. Vaughan was surrounded by 3 computer screens and a mountain of documents. He looked up, his expression shifting from corporate frost to genuine surprise. We have a problem, she said, leaning over his desk. She took a pen and wrote a few lines on a notepad. Dominic has walked into a snare set by the Vance family. He's used the coastal holdings as collateral. If you don't use the prior ancestral clause in the Thorne Trust Charter by tonight, you lose the cliff rights and the private bay. It's a legal loophole that was closed in 1984, but the Thorne Charter still recognizes it. Vaughan looked at the paper, then at her. He didn't ask how she knew. He simply saw the clarity in her eyes. You know the charter by heart. I was curious, she lied, her face heating up. And I don't want construction crews on this beach. It would be too loud. My napping would be severely compromised. I'd have to buy earplugs. Vaughan stood up, moving around the desk until he was inches from her. He ignored the ringing of his phone. You just saved the family a massive headache, Beatrix. Why do you pretend to be so uninterested in the world? Is it a hobby? Beatrix straightened his collar, her fingers lingering on the pulse point of his neck. Because I only work for people I value. And I've already done enough work for one lifetime. I want my paycheck to be in peace and quiet. Vaughan caught her waist and pulled her flush against him. Is that what I am? Someone you value? Perhaps, she whispered, her breath hitching. He kissed her then, a slow, certain kiss that felt like a contract signed in ink rather than whispered in shadows. When they parted, he looked refreshed. I'll handle the board, but later, we are going to talk about where a socialite learned to spot a Vance snare. 6. The victory, however, brought Dominic's mother, Evelyn, to the coast. She was a woman who lived for status. She arrived with Dominic and Piper in tow, intent on a family reconciliation that felt more like a trial. It is a scandal, Evelyn said, pacing Beatrix's living room. Vaughan, you cannot be serious about this girl. The news is everywhere. You are the head of this family. You cannot marry the woman Dominic jilted. It looks as though you are taking his leftovers. She is a decorative distraction at best. A very expensive rug. Beatrix sat in her armchair, looking perfectly unbothered, her eyes half-lidded. She is exactly who she chooses to be, Vaughan said, his voice a dangerous rumble. He stood behind Beatrix's chair, his hand resting on her shoulder. Vaughan, be reasonable, Evelyn snapped. She is vacant. She has no mind for the business. She probably thinks a dividend is a type of bird. Beatrix stood up slowly. She shed her soft cardigan, smoothing her silk dress. When she spoke, her voice was no longer light, it was cold, precise, and carried the weight of a woman who had ended corporate wars before breakfast. I know every name on your board, Evelyn, Beatrix said. I also know that 3 of them are currently working with the Vance family to short your stock. I know that the instability they are worried about isn't Dominic's love life, it's his inability to read a basic balance sheet. I chose to be quiet because I wanted peace. I played the fool because it was the only way to get people to leave me alone. But if you bring your noise into my home and insult the man who is actually keeping this family afloat, I will be forced to speak. And trust me, you won't like the sound of it." Evelyn was silent, her mouth hanging open. Dominic looked at Beatrix as if seeing a ghost. "You've been hiding," Dominic whispered, his voice cracking. "All those years, you knew exactly what you were doing. You were the one who fixed my presentations, weren't you? You didn't just suggest things." "No," Beatrix said. "I was resting. There is a difference. I gave you every chance to be the man you claimed to be, but you were too busy looking for a mirror. Now, please, leave. You're scaring the seagulls." Vaughan looked at his sister with a chilling finality. "This is Beatrix's home. You are guests who have overstayed your welcome. Leave, now." As the cars roared away, the manor fell into a deep, ringing silence. Beatrix slumped back into her chair, her legs feeling like jelly. "That was very loud. I think I need to sleep for a week. Or a month. Is a month possible?" Vaughan didn't leave. He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "You were magnificent, but I think I've ruined your retirement." Beatrix looked at him, her heart doing a strange, fluttering dance. "You didn't ruin it. You just joined it. But if we're going to be a power couple, Vaughan, you should know that I'm still not doing the seating charts for the gala. I have standards." Vaughan chuckled, a deep, rich sound. "Deal. I'll hire 100 planners." 7. The return to the city for the annual Foundation Opera was the final hurdle. The rumors had reached a fever pitch. Beatrix wore a gown of midnight blue, so dark it looked black until the light hit the silk. During the intermission, they were approached by Silas Vance, the man whose land grab Beatrix had thwarted. "Vaughan," Vance said with a sneer. "A bold move. I suppose even a man of your stature enjoys a project. Though I hear this one has quite a sharp tongue when she's cornered. Like a cat in a silk bag." Vaughan's expression turned to stone, but Beatrix spoke first, her voice a soft, melodic hum. "Mr. Vance, you look tired. Is it the new development? I heard the legal challenges regarding the cliff rights turned out to be quite ancestral. All those old property lines and trust clauses. They can be such a headache for someone who doesn't do their homework. Perhaps you should try a different career. I hear gardening is lovely." Vance paled, his eyes darting to the board members standing nearby. "Of course, a man of the future wouldn't worry about the past," Beatrix said with a sweet, vacant smile. "Until it catches up with him. Shall we find our seats, Vaughan? The second act is about to begin, and I believe it involves a very satisfying downfall." I brought binoculars. As they walked away, Vaughan leaned in. "You are very efficient when you are annoyed." 8. The final confrontation came not from a rival, but from a ghost of the original Beatrix's past. A man named Gideon, a reckless socialite, appeared at a gallery event. "Beatrix, still climbing, I see," Gideon sneered, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. "Does your new protector know about the letters you used to write me? The ones where you begged me to take you away because Dominic wouldn't call you back? I still have them, you know. They're quite poetic, in a desperate sort of way." Vaughan stepped forward, his presence draining the air from the room. "Is there an issue?" "No issue," Gideon said, emboldened by the crowd. "Just reminding her of our history. You might want to check her desk for old secrets, Mr. Thorne." Beatrix looked Gideon in the eye. She didn't look at Vaughan for help, she didn't need it. "Gideon, you are talking about the letters a lonely 19-year-old girl wrote while you were busy borrowing her money to cover your gambling debts. I have those bank records, Gideon. I kept them because I like the color of the stamp. If you mention history again, I will have them delivered to your father and your creditors by morning. It would be a lot of paperwork for you, wouldn't it? You always hated paperwork." Gideon paled and vanished into the crowd. Beatrix immediately leaned against Vaughan. "That was exhausting. Can we go home?" I've said enough for one day. My brain is officially off duty. I want a cheeseburger. Vaughan took her hand. You had the records all along. I found them in the house, she said. I didn't want to read them, too much drama, but I remembered the details. Details are hard to forget, especially when they involve money. 9. Vaughan took her to a private island the following week to truly escape the city. One evening, during a heavy tropical rain, they sat by a fireplace in the teak wood villa. You're doing it again, Beatrix said, sitting on the table beside him. Thinking about work. I can see the gears turning. It's making a noise. Vaughan looked at her, his eyes reflecting the amber lamplight. I am thinking about you. I'm afraid that one day, you'll decide you don't need this, or me, and you'll just disappear back into your silence. I feel like I'm falling in love with a ghost. Beatrix took his hand and held it to her heart. I'm not a ghost, Vaughan. I'm just tired. In the life I remember, I was only worth what I could achieve. I never stopped moving until my heart stopped beating. When I came here, I chose to be still because I didn't want to hurt anymore. I don't want to be useful to the world. I want to be known by you. Even when I'm being annoying about the air conditioning. Vaughan pulled her closer. I don't want a partner for the company, Beatrix. I want the person who is tired. I want to be the one you lean on when you don't want to use your brain. But I need to know you are with me. For the first time, Beatrix didn't play a part. She was simply herself, sharp, weary, and deeply in love. 10. The final attempt to ruin them came when they returned to the city. Dominic, having lost his position, displayed a medical record from Beatrix's past on the screens at a gala, a time when she had struggled with her mental health after her parents died. He wanted to show she was unstable. The room went silent. Dominic looked proud. Beatrix stepped forward. That record is from a long time ago, Dominic. It shows a girl who had to learn how to survive the dark. I am not ashamed of her. She is the reason I am standing here now. Unlike you, she didn't steal. She looked at the screen. But if we are sharing records of instability. The screen changed. Beatrix had accessed the Foundation's logs. It showed Dominic's personal accounts, proving he had been embezzling money from the family charity. I didn't want to do this, Beatrix said quietly as security led Dominic away. I wanted you to just go away. But you wouldn't let me rest. Vaughan took her hand. Are you all right? I'm fine, she said. But I think I'm officially done with parties. And reveals. And people who think they're smarter than me. 11. A month later, they were back at the coast. Dominic was gone, and Piper had found a quiet life of her own. Beatrix was in the garden, sketching the waves. Vaughan walked down the path, carrying 2 glasses of tea. The board is still asking for a wedding date, he said. They're suggesting the cathedral. Beatrix leaned her head on his shoulder. A cathedral sounds very loud. And the shoes would be terrible. I'd have to walk for 20 minutes. Vaughan pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a simple gold ring. I told them no, I don't want a parade. I want a Tuesday. Here, in the garden. Just us. Beatrix looked at the ring. A Tuesday. A Tuesday. Maybe a Wednesday if you want to sleep in. Beatrix laughed. She put the ring on. I think I can manage a Tuesday. As long as there's cake. And no speeches. The wedding was, indeed, a Tuesday. Beatrix wore a simple lace dress. There were no crowds, no speeches. Piper was the only guest. They stood at the edge of the cliff as the sun began to set. When they were finished, Vaughan kissed her. They went back to the house and ate cake in the kitchen. The press thinks you've vanished, Piper said. Good, Vaughan said, holding Beatrix's hand. As the moon rose over the ocean, they sat on the balcony. What are your plans for tomorrow, Mrs. Thorne? Vaughan asked. Beatrix leaned against him. I think I might stay in bed until noon, she said. And then, I might help you decide what to have for lunch. It's a very busy schedule. Vaughan smiled, kissing her forehead. I think I can live with that. End. Thank you for watching.